Bloodborne the board game is played with 1 to 4 players, each choosing a unique hunter that boasts a double-sided trick weapon featuring up to 3 different attacks as well as an ability on each side. You'll select from a variety of campaigns, each of which offers 3 chapters with varying stories and enemies, with the goal of completing the hunt objective, which is nearly always advanced by completing insight missions, which will be revealed upon finding certain tiles as you explore Yharnam. Exploration is done by revealing tiles from a shuffled deck of tiles, in a betrayal at House on the Hill type manner, with the tiles required for the mission being somewhere in the deck in addition to a limited number of random ones. Players use a deck of 12 cards to perform every action in the game, be it moving, attacking, or interacting, either by discarding a card or slotting it into an open space on your weapon's board in the case of an attack. This deck of cards can be upgraded primarily by killing enemies over the 3 chapters of a campaign, and spending the blood echoes they give you to replace a card in your deck with one of the random cards in the Hunter's Dream. Each time a round passes, and the players die or opt to dream, which is the act of returning to the dream to trade in blood echoes or heal, the hunt track ticks up, resetting all enemies every 4th tick, which also resets the boss's HP as well as certain mini-boss type enemies that spawn throughout the campaign. When the final spot on the track is reached, you have that 1 round to complete the hunt. Fail, and the campaign is over, and you'll have to tackle it again from scratch. Should you reach the end of the campaign, the final hunt mission is always a showdown with a boss, each which has 2 phases and unique attack decks. Bring them down, and all that's left is to read the conclusion. The combat is the bread and butter of the game, and clearly was the design team's focus, since for the better and worse, it is easily the sleekest part of the game's design. The enemy deck features 3 basic attacks, 2 special attacks, and 1 ability, which correspond to each enemy's card. When you are exchanging blows, you only see the card that they draw after you have committed to your attack. This is a brilliant system that allows strategizing yet leaves in a bit of luck, and prevents the game from becoming a rigid math problem, since you can use your knowledge of which cards are in the enemy's discard pile to figure out which attacks might be used next, though since the deck reshuffles once empty, there will always be attacks where anything is possible. While the general story of a campaign is almost always going to be the same, there are many elements along the way that can change the experience drastically. First, the tiles involved as well as the order you'll draw them essentially guarantee a different Yharnam every time. Sometimes this could result in an easily completed mission, such as an NPC being spawned right next to where you need to escort them to, or an extremely difficult one, such as that same NPC being spawned on the opposite side of the map from their destination. Second, around half of the campaigns involve random enemies, each of which has 2 variants, 3 variants if you count the print-and-play alternatives for the base game, making for all kinds of combinations and challenges. Players seeking further variety can add a mini-boss to an encounter, which will have you draw a card from a mini-boss deck each time you enter a room, with there being a possibility one will be waiting for you in addition to the room's other threats. Third, small things like consumables you find and the upgrades that flip into the store always give you different tools to address the challenges that present themselves. Fourth, tackling a campaign with a different hunter is inevitably a different experience, with some being able to bring you better starts against certain campaigns and bring something different to the table. And lastly, it is completely possible to miss certain insight missions, not to mention the awesome fact that there are quite a few missions that have diverging paths, making you want to go back and try the other option the next time through. This game falls into the ideal category of offering complexity, while not having a laborious setup or overwhelming game length. Here, setup is only a matter of 5 minutes once you've decided on your scenario and hunter. Aside from make or break moments that the group needs to think hard about, or the occasional rule that needs clarifying, the game is constantly flowing, assuming all players have a comparable comfort level with the game. This is helped by the fact that players can take their turns in any order in a round, keeping everyone engaged and thinking about when they should jump into the action. You are also able to add certain bonus chapters to extend length if you would like, with the standard campaign otherwise running around 6 hours. Not too short, but not so long as to be daunting. If you're a fan of the source material, it is a big relief to see that the developers clearly played the game, unlike whoever designed the items in the Dark Souls board game. They managed to adapt the game in a way that is faithful, but not a retelling of the main story, oftentimes bringing twists to a familiar event such as the Fall of Old Yarnum, with you very much feeling like a hunter while playing through that. That said, I wouldn't say that the storytelling will do an incredible amount for non-fans, but it will be enough of a narrative to frame the action in. While combat in general is great, the boss fights are designed at odds with what makes it so good. When you first encounter a boss, unlike the rest of the enemies in the game, you have no idea what is coming at you, so unless you've got some guesses about its attacks from prior game knowledge, the general strategy is to cross your fingers and hope you've got the right answer, and spread out if you're worried about an AoE attack. In general, these fights are awkward, since hitting a reset on the hunt track undoes your progress against them, and fighting them feels less strategic than fighting the regular enemies throughout the levels. A lesser point is that, with two exceptions I can think of, the guns are useless against the bosses, along with many of the runes and some of the consumables. That isn't to say I want the bosses to be easier, mind you, but between the randomness and a lot of your options being limited, it just feels like the decision making is majorly scaled back from the bosses, as opposed to the regular enemies in the game. I'm fortunate enough to have a massive gaming table, but with the player space needed, the hunt track, and of course the map itself, the play area can get quite large. Beyond that, even with adequate space, the table tends to become a clutter of active insight mission cards, the hunt mission, additionally spawned enemy cards, and tokens. This can be a hassle when you are looking around trying to refresh yourself on what missions are currently active, since the game conveys absolutely everything through these cards. The small box expansions suffer a bit from only introducing one double-sided tile and generally wanting to incorporate them heavily during their respective campaign. Well, that wouldn't be a problem if they gracefully integrated into the map. Instead, you get randomly teleported to them, and worse yet, in the Yarhar Ghul campaign, you spend 2 whole chapters just on that one tile, removing exploration completely. While I understand them wanting to incorporate these unique tiles that don't get used anywhere else, it is quite jarring. And it is sad that due to every small box's campaign using the core game's tile set, they are left not feeling nearly as unique as they had the potential to be. While the odd misprint or mistake isn't unheard of in games, especially ones with so much text, I was frankly floored by the consistency of serious errors. I won't even hold the several spelling errors against them, but from tiles to include in the tile deck being wrong, rewards being combinations of 2 different reward names, all the way to a card referencing a totally incorrect location, I found myself always with the FAQ on hand in setting up a campaign, and could see some serious frustration from people unaware of the FAQ, having a game night grind totally to a halt. It is probably wishful thinking, but Cool Mini or Not really should send out edited cards to everyone for the most serious errors. At this point in the game's lifecycle, there are print-and-play fixed versions of these cards available from Cool Mini or Not, and this is thus no longer a personal issue for me, but is still an extremely bad look and needs to be noted. Simply put, PvP is a broken, tacked-on mode for Kickstarter stretch goals and equates to 1 double-sided page in the rules and 4 player screens. Even with heavy house rules, we could not get it to be anything close to playable. Even more so than the misprints, this is in poor form, since it only serves to potentially lure in the people that PvP appeals to more than PvE. This is just additionally sad because the Chalice Dungeon expansion already offered plenty of content without adding on this as a feature. For any Bloodborne fans, especially those craving a co-op dungeon crawler, this game and its big box expansions are a no-brainer purchase. The game strikes a perfect balance between offering a strategic experience with friends that flows fast and isn't laborious to set up. The base game comes packed with 4 hunters, 4 campaigns, and their respective bosses, and 7 different enemies, each of which has 4 figures. For the price and considering the quality of the figures, this is a decent bang for your buck, especially since each campaign has replay value, and the average campaign seems to take 6 hours or so, meaning you're looking at about 24 hours of unique play experience. However, the one glaring shortcoming is that there are only 4 hunters to play with, meaning in a 4-player game, there will be no team composition variety, and your choices are very narrow. This makes it compelling to buy the Blood Moon box, which adds a whopping 6 hunters, and the Chalice Dungeon expansion, which adds 4. As for the small box expansions, I recommend holding off. They aren't bad, but sadly suffer from only being able to incorporate the base game's tiles into their campaigns, and being overly eager to use their jumbo tiles, but incorporating them very clumsily. If you do pick one up, Bergenworth is by far the funnest, with the Yarhar campaign being horrible, with its defining feature being removing exploration from 2 of 3 chapters and shortening the game's runtime. While the bosses are more of a spectacle and a test of how upgraded you are than a strategic affair, the total experience of the game is still pretty solid, and surprisingly tactical for being so easy to teach and dive right into. The freeform turn order, and the fact that your brain will always be working out the math on how to kill something, makes this a rare case of a game you are always invested in even when it's not your turn. Happy hunting.